Hey guys, my name's Taylor. I am a functional nutritionist. I have my master's degree in human nutrition and functional medicine, and I am here to break down the latest vegan twin study that everybody's talking about. I have a unique perspective that I think you would be interested in hearing. So if you haven't watched the series, I highly recommend watching it. And before you do, read this blog post. The link is in the description. That'll give you a nice basis and understanding of the study design and the many conflicts of interest that were involved with the study and the study authors before going to watch the docuseries. Now, after you watch the docuseries, come back and watch this video because I have got to share the things that the study got right. There were a few things that the study got right and the many things that were wrong. And the translation from the study results from the paper that was published in JAMA to the Netflix docuseries. So let's jump in. What the series got right. Okay, so I was very impressed that the series addressed the negative effects of the standard American diet. And the docuseries raised awareness of the link between the standard American diet, aka the SAD diet, and the risk of chronic disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer. I was very impressed that they made this link because a lot of mainstream media doesn't. So we're linking the connection between what we eat and how we feel. They also introduced the concept of epigenetics, which you can't really talk about the impact of diet on your overall health without mentioning epigenetics. So this is the idea that our genes are not our fate, that we have the power to control the expression of our genes and either promote disease or silence disease and promote health. So I was very impressed that they mentioned epigenetics. They also, interestingly, mentioned body composition, which this tends to get left out of the conversation when we talk about weight loss. That's why Ozempic is such a, one of the reasons why it's such a viral issue right now is because with Ozempic, we're inducing weight loss as a GLP-1 agonist, but we're not really focusing on body composition. And body composition, this is what matters. So weight loss is one thing, but we want to make sure we're losing primarily body fat and maintaining or building our lean muscle mass. So the study mentioned this and the importance of, not going off of the scale as your only metric of weight loss and really doing some sort of like DEXA scan to assess your body composition to see how much weight that's lost is lean mass versus body fat. So very impressed by that. They also, another thing that they did right was they talked about regenerative agriculture. So a lot of the film or the docuseries revolves around the environmental impact of our diet and the standard American diet specifically. And I was very impressed that they brought regenerative agriculture into the conversation, but they were very quick to dismiss it. They probably got the only regenerative farmer that's vegan or follows a plant-based diet to be interviewed in the docuseries, which I thought was kind of comical to kind of say that regenerative agriculture is kind of like a fairy tale solution. This is the idea of putting cows back into the pasture, allowing them to eat their ancestrally appropriate diet, and also restore the soil health. And with the restoration of the soil, this is like the biggest carbon sink we have. It sequesters the carbon from the atmosphere and really does an incredible job with helping to combat climate change. But the series was very quick to dismiss it, which I thought was kind of weird. And another thing that they got right is the fact that food labeling is so confusing. That there's a lot of greenwashing that goes on with food labels in the grocery store. You pick up a carton of eggs, it says free range. What exactly does that mean? What exactly does organic mean? Pasture raised, what should I look for? So that 1000% right on the money. food labeling is confusing. So I was happy that they addressed that. And by the way, when you're buying eggs or any sort of poultry, pasture raised is what you want. Free range doesn't really mean much. They got that right. But so the last and final thing I'll mention before getting into what they got wrong was that factory farming is a major problem, like a major problem. We all know this. Like, factory farming is terrible for humans, it's terrible for the animals, it's terrible for the environment. It's like the most inhumane, like, stupid way to raise livestock. Honestly, it's just like so unsustainable. But I thought that they did a good job of painting the picture of why factory farming is a problem. But as you'll soon see, they left out a very important detail of that conversation. So we'll get into that in a second. If you guys are liking this video so far, let me just say, please subscribe. I put a lot of work into the research that I do, and I'm just starting to put this content on YouTube. So it would mean the world to me to have your support. If you're a fan, or even just your feedback, I would love to hear what I can do better in the comments below. So let's get into what the series got wrong. The series lumped processed meat and dairy together under the standard American diet, which, yes, processed meat and conventional dairy are a part of the standard American diet. But what I thought was really, really interesting is that they made the standard American diet about processed meat and dairy. Not once did they mention sugar. Like, I thought this was so weird because refined carbs, refined grains, wheat, soy, these are the backbone of the standard American diet. This is what makes up your crackers, your breads, your pretzels, your, like, all of the terrible things, the flour that goes into making like cookies and cakes. And this is the stuff that people are eating in excess. And yes, sweets and pastries often come with saturated fat, but we've also been eating saturated fat for like as long as we've been human. Our ancestral diet, of course, included red meat, and within that red meat is saturated fat. We've been eating or consuming dairy for probably as long as we've been human. And they really, really love to hammer home this like disgusting image of the meat that's consumed in America, like showing pictures of hot dogs and deli meat, and yeah, that stuff's like pretty gross. But they conveniently left out sugar. Now, I don't know if this was some sort of coercion by Big Food telling the production company, like, leave out sugar. We don't want to draw any attention towards us. I don't know. So it was really interesting to me that they focused on these foods that, frankly, at their core are ancestral, like meat and dairy. Like, processed meats can be okay for you. Like, I consume cured meats, so cured meats that are cured with salt. Now, this is hard to find because a lot of cured meats are cured with nitrates and nitrites, which have their own set of problems, but it's possible to find high quality meats. Ground beef is also a processed meat. It goes through a processing before it's packaged and sent to your grocery store. When they turn it into ground beef, that is considered processing. And also dairy, when consumed in its whole food form, has a myriad of benefits. It's linked to satiety. It's an amazing source of protein. The dairy in this country isn't the greatest quality, but that's why going for raw dairy, raw cheeses, even like whey protein isolate, like, these are really great ways to get in protein. But again, they chose to focus on this processed meat agenda, like really, really making it out to be disgusting. And another thing, so on the topic of meat, they make this point in the docuseries that you don't need to get your protein from meat. And yeah, that's true. You really don't need to get protein from meat, but it's a hell of a lot easier to get your protein from a whole food source like me, that also contains micronutrients like zinc, selenium, copper, manganese. All of these micronutrients are essential for our overall health, and they're very limited in plant foods, and also they're not very bioavailable. So in plant foods, micronutrients, minerals are bound to anti-nutrients. These are phytates, lectins, oxalates. These bind to micronutrients and inhibit their absorption. So yes, you can get protein from plants, totally. It just takes more planning, because you're not getting all of the essential amino acids. You have to do a lot of planning of your meals to make sure you're doing grains and legumes, or grains and nuts and seeds, just to make sure you're getting all of those amino acids. But you could just eat meat, right? Like regeneratively raised meat, if that's accessible to you. So yes, you don't need to get protein from meat, but it's a heck of a lot easier if you do. And another thing that they got wrong was visceral fat. So I was actually very impressed that they brought visceral fat into the conversation. The twins in the study had their visceral fat measured via an MRI scan, and they linked the visceral fat levels of the twins to saturated fat and within the standard American diet complex. But that's not the only thing that drives visceral fat accumulation. First of all, visceral fat accumulates from eating excess calories. And what is the main source of excess calories in Americans' diet? Ultra-processed foods. And this is from carbs and sugar, right? Sure, saturated fat and fat in general is within these ultra-processed food products, but it's not in silo driving visceral fat accumulation. Excess calories, and under that umbrella falls sugar and saturated fat and trans fat. Those are the things that are contributing to visceral fat. Not to mention a lack of sleep, lack of exercise, excess alcohol consumption. There was no nuance here when we talked about visceral fat. It was like saturated fat increases visceral fat, and that's the problem here. But really, there's so many other things we need to consider in context. Another thing, so I mentioned previously that I was impressed that the study mentioned regenerative agriculture, but what I wasn't so happy with was how quickly they dismissed it by saying that regenerative agriculture isn't scalable. And this is just not true. We have the land in the United States. It's just the scalability comes with work. We'd have to change our entire food system. We'd have to educate farmers to adopt more sustainable farming practices. We'd have to shift consumer demand towards regenerative meat. And most importantly, we would need to have our politicians on board to make this transition. And a lot of politicians, I hate to say, they're lobbied. They're lobbied by big food companies, and big food companies control the agricultural sector. They control the food, or the demand of the food that's grown in this country. And what is the highest demand? Commodity crops, wheat, corn, soy. These are grown like in abundance in the US. So we have the land, it's just how we're using it, pretty much. Another thing that I thought was like pretty comical and also like very strange was that they devoted pretty much like an entire episode to talking about foodborne illness and the potential contamination or illness that you can get from consuming meat. So they focused a lot on salmonella in chicken. They focused on raw meat, raw poultry. They talked about E. coli. But funny enough, what they didn't mention is that nobody is eating raw meat, right? We're cooking our meat before we eat it, and cooking destroys like 99.9% of bacteria. So nobody eats raw chicken. Like, we are going to cook our food before we eat it, and that's going to decimate any sort of pathogen that's on the meat when cooked properly and thoroughly. And I just thought this was so funny because yes, there are definitely food outbreaks that are due to raw meat, but like the incidence of food-borne illness is so much higher for kale and lettuce. If you guys remember the big food news, the big food outbreak of 2015, I believe, was Chipotle, and it was from E. coli in romaine lettuce. And same thing with Panera Bread. More recently, they had a foodborne, they had a outbreak, and it was from lettuce. So we're not cooking lettuce, right? These pathogens still make their way onto our fruits and vegetables. That's why we need to wash them thoroughly, but a lot of times some are missed, and that is one of the many root causes of foodborne illness in this country. And they didn't mention it because it didn't match their narrative, which I thought was interesting. Also, there was a lot of fear mongering devoted to pathogens, and we are literally like surrounded by pathogens all the time. I mean, people don't want to hear it, but every inch of our body is covered in bacteria, viruses. Our DNA is made up of 8% virus. We're arguably more bacteria than we are human. The human body contains trillions of microorganisms that outnumber our cells 10 to 1. So no matter how much they were trying to instill fear, I think they were kind of piggybacking off of the pandemic here about talking about pathogens and bacteria and how we should be afraid of them. We're literally made of bacteria. Our bugs in our gut help digest food. They make vitamins. They make anti-inflammatory metabolites. So there's no reason to fear bacteria, especially in meat, raw meat. So another issue that I had was that we talked about factory farming, right? And that they mentioned how bad it was for the environment, for the animals, for humans. But nowhere did they mention industrialized agriculture as a whole. The docuseries focuses on factory farming, but they fail to mention industrialized agriculture, which is also terrible for the environment. Industrialized agriculture, literally, they use soil tilling, these very harsh machinery to disrupt the soil and to turn the soil, and that consequently strips the soil of its nutrients. We use 1.1 billion pounds of pesticides annually in the US, which is absurd. That's just in the US. And we use 280 million pounds of glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup. It's sprayed on crops every year. The 280 million pounds, that's annually, and that's primarily wheat, corn, and soy. And these are the backbones of ultra-processed foods. So a lot of the time, the glyphosate residue makes its way onto our grocery store shelves in the form of these ultra-processed food products. And this is what gets me, is that glyphosate is literally an antibiotic. Like, Monsanto received a patent for glyphosate as an antibiotic in 2010. But here we are, fear-mongering about the antibiotics that are used in chicken, which I don't agree with. I don't think that we should be consuming meat that's pumped full of antibiotics. I think that whole practice is very inhumane. However, we can't dismiss the fact that the plant foods that we're eating are also coated in antibiotics. Glyphosate, when ingested, has been shown to sterilize the microbiome. So all of that bacteria that I was talking about in your gut, glyphosate decimates them, wipes them out. And that is why glyphosate is linked to cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, like autoimmune disease. Glyphosate is like literally poison, and it was not mentioned once. Red flag. And then finally, I already said this, but it was kind of sus that sugar wasn't mentioned, like, at all. That's pretty impressive, but also, like, very sad that they didn't bring it up once as a root cause for chronic disease. I don't know if it was just inconvenient because the basis of a plant-based diet or a vegan diet is mostly carbs and sugar, but again, I'll let you decide. And the thing that like totally blew my mind is we were introduced throughout the docuseries to all of these like alternative meats, and we were supposed to get like excited about this new science that's happening to creating meat in a lab. And they were talking the students from this Stanford lab of alternative meats. They were talking and just like spewing out random things that literally had no evidence behind them. They said that the plant meat was just as nutritious as the animal meat, but there's literally no comparison between a Beyond Burger and grass-fed beef. Like, if I'm being honest, the Beyond Burger ingredients, the list is a mile long. And on this list, let me just point out a few things. Cyanocobalamin. So cyanocobalamin is a form of vitamin B12, and it needs to be converted into methylcobalamin in order to be used by the body. So it's fortified, right? It's added to the plant-based burger patty. It's a synthetic chemical that's added, and our body still needs to take the cyanocobalamin and convert it to methylcobalamin, which is the active B12. But a lot of us aren't efficient at this conversion process. A lot of us have mutation in the gene that converts cyanocobalamin to methylcobalamin. So that is something that needs to be considered, is the bioavailability of the nutrients that are fortified in these foods. And also they have like methyl cellulose, which is literally like wood shavings that are used to hold the product together. And the only ingredient, the only ingredient in meat is literally meat. So what does that tell you? I just feel like, it's so simple. Like, just eat real food, right? But for some reason, the docuseries did not want us to walk away with that message. They were really pushing these plant-based meat alternatives. And what I really thought was just the icing on the cake was that the results of the study, which they really didn't talk about the study, like design or results, until the very end. In the first episode, in the very beginning, and in the last episode, in the very end. Everything in the middle was just this weird kind of like sales pitch for processed vegan meats. But the results were very underwhelming. So they found that vegans lost more weight, which was looked at as a good thing in the study. However, when we assessed body composition in the Netflix series, they really they came up short, the vegans. I have to say, the vegans lost more mass, more lean mass than the omnivores. They lost more body weight, right? More total body weight, but they lost more lean mass and less body fat. So that's not what we want. When we lose weight, we want to lose more body fat and less lean mass, and that wasn't shown in the study. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they chose to share that. And then, I'm glad they shared it, but they tried to dismiss it at the end by saying that the vegans didn't eat enough to maintain their body weight or to maintain their lean mass. So I thought that was interesting that they were blaming the vegans for not eating enough on the diet. And there was just one final thing that kind of was just mind-boggling to me, was that there were so many claims made throughout this docuseries that were based on no evidence at all, like none. One was that meat wasn't part of our diet before 150 years ago. Not sure where that came from, but obviously that's false. Like, we literally have evolved from eating meat. So how could it not have been a part of our diet before 150 years ago? It's just bonkers to me. And then this one was just like literally too good to be true from like a hilarious standpoint, was that every time you eat a steak, a little puff of smoke goes up in the Amazon. Like, what? People are gonna hear that and think that it's true, and there's no evidence that they backed any of these claims up on. It's crazy to me. So I don't know. This docuseries, honestly, as a nutritionist, I thought it was very well done from a cinematic standpoint, but from a research and an evidence-based standpoint, it was comical. It was very poorly done. And I think that a major gap was missed throughout the whole study when they failed to address sugar in the standard American diet, and they also failed to address nutrition as a whole. So they're talking about plant-based eating, they're talking about following a vegan diet and how it's better for climate change, environmental health. Sure, agreed. When you're switching from a standard American diet to a vegan diet, it's probably going to be better. But we can't have that conversation if we're not talking about nutrition, if we're not prioritizing nutrition, and if we're not prioritizing protein intake to maintain that lean muscle mass that was so easily lost in this 8-week study. So that's all I have